New York's architectural story begins long before the idea of a skyscraper ever existed. Back when Manhattan was little more than a patch of wilderness, rolling hills, and muddy trails carved by the Lenape people. When the Dutch arrived in 1624, they built not monuments, but necessity's tiny wooden houses, small farms, warehouses, and forts. Yet, even these modest beginnings carried the DNA of a future giant. New Amsterdam, as it was called, was created not as a kingdom or a cultural center, but as a business outpost. Everything the Dutch built had a single purpose: economic efficiency. They straightened streets, plotted trade routes, dredged harbors, and constructed buildings designed to move goods quickly. This mindset, the idea that the city itself must work like a machine, laid the foundation for everything New York would become. When the English took control in 1664, the architecture began evolving again. Brick replaced wood. Taller, sturdier buildings lined the narrow streets. Churches rose above the rooftops, casting shadows over bustling markets. Immigrants from Europe poured in, each bringing their own building traditions. Row houses, taverns, workshops, and shipyards gave the city its early identity. But hidden beneath all of this was a force that would soon reshape history: population growth. As ships continued arriving, Manhattan's limited land pushed people upward before upward building was even possible. By the early 1800s, cast iron construction began appearing in districts like Soho, allowing for larger windows, bigger interiors, and sturdier buildings. Then came the invention that truly unlocked New York's destiny: the safety elevator. Suddenly, height wasn't dangerous. It was profitable. The city that had been rising slowly through history now stood on the edge of vertical transformation. What began as a trading port was turning into something entirely new, a place defined not by what spread across the land, but by what reached toward the sky. No one in those early days could have imagined the skyline that would one day arise from this small island. Yet every modest warehouse, every iron-fronted building, every early commercial block was a stepping stone toward a future where ambition would reshape the horizon. New York didn't just grow, it learned to reinvent itself over and over again. And soon, the world would look to Manhattan as the birthplace of an architectural revolution. By the late 19th century, New York City was no longer simply growing, it was exploding. Immigrants flooded the city. Banks, factories, shipping companies, and newspapers battled for space. The streets became crowded, then overcrowded, then impossibly congested. But instead of slowing New York down, this pressure pushed it upward. And with the arrival of steel frame engineering, the vertical revolution began. The year 1870 introduced the equitable life building, a structure so massive and surprising that newspapers declared it a mountain of granite, 7 stories. That was enough to astonish the world. But New York was just getting started. As businesses realized that height meant visibility and dominance, architects and engineers rushed to outdo one another. Buildings like the Tribune Building and the Western Union Building climbed higher each year, each pushing the boundaries of what had been thought possible. Then came steel, strong, flexible, and capable of supporting enormous weight. Steel frames allowed buildings to grow without collapsing under their own mass. New York quickly became the testing ground for this new technology. Blocks of stone and brick were replaced by towering skeletons of steel, wrapped in facades that blended artistry with engineering, yet technology alone didn't create the skyscraper age ambition did. Rival business titans wanted to stamp their names into the skyline. Insurance companies, newspaper empires, and banks battled not just for customers, but for architectural superiority. Every new building needed to be bigger, grander, taller. The skyline became a scoreboard of power. As towers rose into the clouds, something else began to happen. People around the world started looking at New York with wonder and sometimes concern. No other city was changing so fast or reaching so high. New York represented a future many nations weren't ready for, a symbol of American industrial might, financial dominance, and cultural influence. And while some countries admired it, others quietly felt threatened. Competition had begun long before anyone realized it. The skyscraper wasn't just a building. It was a message, a declaration that New York understood the future and intended to lead it. And as the 20th century approached, The city was ready to enter its most dramatic architectural era yet. The 1920s roared with jazz, wealth, and ambition. It was the era when art, speed, industry, and confidence collided. Nowhere was this more evident than in the race to build the world's tallest skyscraper. New York wasn't just constructing buildings, it was launching a war of height. At the center of this battle were two titans, Walter Chrysler and John J. Raskob. Chrysler, the automobile mogul, wanted a skyscraper that symbolized America's technological speed and modernity. His vision became the Chrysler Building, an Art Deco masterpiece with a crown that shimmered like a steel sunrise. Every inch of it was designed to express forward motion, stainless steel arches, triangular windows, curves shaped like car fenders, and a spire that secretly rose inside the building until it was ready to be unveiled. Meanwhile, Raskob had a simple yet bold question: why not build higher? He envisioned a skyscraper that would dwarf all others, a tower that would prove the might of American capitalism. And so began the construction of the Empire State Building, an engineering marvel built in record-shattering time, with workers assembling floors faster than anyone believed possible. As the buildings climbed, newspapers turned the rivalry into front-page drama. Architects hid their blueprints. Developers kept their final heights secret. The competition became a symbol of American daring, a city pushing the limits of human engineering simply because it could. In 1930, the Chrysler Building briefly became the tallest building in the world. Crowds celebrated. Artists sketched it. Tourists flooded in to see its glittering crown. But Chrysler's victory lasted only months. On May 1, 1931, the Empire State Building opened at 1,250 feet, an astonishing feat given the economic hardships of the Great Depression. This wasn't just a competition, it was a declaration. The Empire State Building became a beacon of hope, proving that even in crisis, New York remained fearless. And across the globe, nations watched with a mix of admiration and unease. The skyline was becoming a symbol of American dominance, a silent message that the country had entered the century with unmatched ambition. The battle between Chrysler and the Empire State didn't just create icons, it created the identity of the modern skyline itself. By the mid-20th century, New York City wasn't just an American city, it was the center of the world. Its architecture reflected this transformation, evolving from symbols of business success into monuments of global influence. The end of World War II reshaped the planet, and in the reshaping, New York emerged as the headquarters of diplomacy, finance, media, and culture. The construction of the United Nations headquarters in 1947 marked a turning point. For the first time, nations gathered beneath one roof in a building that overlooked the East River. A structure built not simply with steel and glass, but with the hope of global cooperation. Architects from around the world collaborated on the design, transforming New York into the architectural capital of international unity. Meanwhile, mid-century modernism swept through the city. Skyscrapers shed their decorative crowns and adopted sleek, minimalist facades. Towers like the Leva House and the Seagram Building introduced new standards, clean lines, open plazas, and light-filled interiors. These buildings didn't just change Manhattan. They influenced architectural styles worldwide. But it wasn't only design that placed New York at the center of global consciousness. It was the power behind those designs. Wall Street's rise turned the city into the financial engine of the world. Broadway became a cultural beacon. Media moguls built towers for newspapers, radio, and TV networks. And immigration continued to add new layers of diversity, turning New York into a living map of global voices. As the skyline grew, so did its meaning. For millions around the world, New York symbolized opportunity and freedom. For political rivals, it symbolized American dominance. For business competitors, it symbolized economic power. The architecture that once reflected ambition now reflected influence, and influence can attract admiration as quickly as rivalry. Other nations began to consider their own skyscrapers as statements of identity. Cities like Moscow, Tokyo, and London watched New York closely, measuring themselves against its rising towers. Some sought to imitate it, others sought to surpass it. and some quietly began to resent its global magnetism. New York had become the world's capital not by military force or political decree, but through architecture, culture, and the irresistible gravity of ambition. In the 1960s, a radical idea emerged, a complex so large, so modern, and so ambitious that it would redefine New York's skyline forever. The World Trade Center, 7 buildings, 2 towers taller than anything the city had ever seen. It was a project that mirrored America's growing confidence, a belief that the future belonged to those who dared to think big. Architect Minoru Yamasaki envisioned the Twin Towers as symbols of world peace through trade. Their design was revolutionary. Instead of thick interior columns, the towers used a tube structure with strength concentrated on the outer walls. This allowed for vast, open office floors perfect for the companies that would soon fill them. Construction began in 1966. Each day, workers climbed higher, installing thousands of steel pieces with stunning precision. By 1973, the Twin Towers were complete. They weren't just tall, they were monumental. Their rectangular, minimalist design stood in stark contrast to the decorative skyscrapers of earlier decades, offering a bold new vision of modern architecture. The towers became icons almost instantly. They appeared in films, postcards, news broadcasts, and photographs seen around the world. They symbolized the beating heart of global finance. But their significance went deeper. For many, the Twin Towers represented optimism, progress, and the belief that humanity could build without limits. However, not everyone viewed the towers through the same lens. As symbols of American economic might, they became focal points for ideological opposition. Enemies of the West saw them not as buildings, but as targets, monuments to a system they despised. Their scale, their name, their presence in the city's skyline all made them symbolic in ways that went far beyond architecture. The towers watched over New York for nearly 3 decades, witnessing its transformations, its struggles, and its celebrations. They became a part of the city's identity, a pair of guardians visible from miles away. And because they carried meaning, they carried vulnerability. The world would soon learn just how powerful and dangerous symbolism can be. On a clear September morning in 2001, New York's skyline became the stage for one of the most tragic and symbolic attacks in human history. The Twin Towers were chosen deliberately not for convenience, but for what they represented. They were the physical embodiment of global finance, Western influence, and American resilience. To strike them was to attempt to strike everything they symbolized. When the planes hit, the world watched in disbelief. The impact wasn't just structural, it was emotional, psychological, and symbolic. The towers burned, leaned, and then collapsed in a roar that echoed across the globe. Dust clouds engulfed the city, streets filled with survivors running for their lives. The skyline that had taken decades to build fell in minutes. New York's architecture had never been attacked so brutally, but the meaning behind the attack ran deeper. Extremist ideology targeted the city because of its power, not military power, but cultural and economic influence. The towers stood as monuments to progress, diversity, ambition, and international engagement. To extremists, these values were enemies. The collapse left a void physically, emotionally, and symbolically. The skyline was broken. The heart of Lower Manhattan was wounded. Yet even amid the tragedy, something extraordinary happened. People rushed toward danger to help others. Firefighters climbed floors they knew they might not return from. Strangers held hands and prayed together in the streets. In the darkest moment, the city revealed its greatest strength: unity. While the world mourned, something else was rising quietly within New Yorkers, a determination to rebuild not out of revenge, but out of defiance, hope, and remembrance. The attack had attempted to tear down the meaning behind the skyline, but instead it reinforced that meaning. New York would rebuild, and the new skyline would not bow to fear. The day the towers fell changed the city forever. But it also proved a truth that would define the city's future. Architecture is more than steel, it is identity. And identity cannot be broken. After the fall of the Twin Towers, Ground Zero became one of the most emotionally charged pieces of land in the world. Millions visited the site, not to see a building, but to feel the absence. The decision to rebuild wasn't simple, it was a question of identity. What should rise in place of the towers? A memorial? A new skyscraper? Something humble? Something bold? The answer would shape how the world perceived America's ability to recover. The eventual plan combined both remembrance and rebirth. The 9/11's memorial honored the lives lost, with two vast reflecting pools marking the footprints of the original towers. Their cascading water created a powerful silence, a reminder of loss, resilience, and reflection. Surrounding the pools stood the names of thousands, etched into bronze for generations to see. Beside the memorial, a new tower began to rise. One World Trade Center, often called the Freedom Tower, was designed to be both symbolic and practical. Its height of 1,776 feet wasn't random. It honored the year the United States declared independence. Its structure combined strength with elegance, using a reinforced concrete core to withstand unprecedented forces while forming a crystalline shape that caught the light of the sun. Construction was slow, careful, and emotional. Each beam lifted into place carried the weight of memory. Workers viewed their task not just as construction, but as contribution, an offering to the fallen and a message to the world. When the tower was completed in 2014, its spire glimmered above the skyline like a declaration. New York had risen again. The new World Trade Center complex included additional towers, cultural spaces, and the Oculus Transportation Hub, a futuristic wing structure symbolizing rebirth. Together, these buildings form not just an architectural project, but a statement. Destruction would not define the skyline. Renewal would. The rebirth of Ground Zero reminded the world that New York does not stay down, it transforms. It reinvents. And in doing so, it reclaims its identity again and again. The skyline, once wounded, now stands with deeper meaning than ever before. With the Freedom Tower complete, many expected New York to reclaim its position as home to the world's tallest buildings. But global architecture had shifted. A new competition emerged, one led by countries with vast land, futuristic visions, and the desire to challenge America's architectural legacy. Dubai built the Burj Khalifa, an engineering miracle stretching into the stratosphere. China erected dozens of supertalls, including the Shanghai Tower with its twisting facade. Malaysia built Merdeka 118, South Korea, the Lot Tower, and Saudi Arabia began the Jeddah Tower, aiming to surpass every height record ever set. These towers weren't just structures. They were political and economic messages, statements of national ambition, cultural pride, and global influence. Each new tower declared, "We can stand as tall as you." Some aimed at surpassing New York's height, others at surpassing its symbolism. Meanwhile, New York responded in a different way. Instead of height, it pursued value. Billionaires rose along Central Park's slender pencil towers built with ultra-advanced engineering, pushing the limits of thinness, luxury, and technology. Instead of bragging rights, New York focused on wealth, elegance, and architectural innovation. The competition between New York and the world shaped a new era of skyline rivalry. Cities no longer measured themselves against mountains. They measured themselves against Manhattan. Some admired its legacy. Some challenged its dominance. Some tried to replace it as the global symbol of modernity. But here's the truth. No matter how tall other cities build, no skyline carries the same cultural power as New York. Its history, its symbolism, its diversity, and above all its meaning make it unique. Skyscrapers elsewhere may exceed its height, but none exceed its influence. In the end, the global architecture race isn't about winning or losing. It's about inspiration. New York lit the spark. The world followed, and the evolution of the skyline continues, reaching higher, shining brighter and telling stories that stretch far beyond glass and steel.